All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for coming today. So I'm going to talk about introducing test automation. I realize that's a fairly arrogant title to say the right way, like this is the way to do it. But hopefully you'll see that this is a collection of my personal experiences and amount of research that I've done over a couple of years into how people can try to test automation, where the potential failures are. Is that coming through? Okay. And we'll try and make it a bit interesting as we go. So before we get started, I think an important thing to talk about is why do we want to introduce automation in the first place? All right, so a couple of things that we want to look at is we want to get fast feedback. All right, ordinarily in a traditional system, you're going to have a development phase, testing phase is going to take time, and you're getting your feedback a couple of days later. Okay, so as a developer, it's going to take time to know if you made a mistake or not. If we're using test automation, we shorten that feedback loop. Okay, so with a good strategy in place, we can have unit tests that will tell us within seconds or maybe minutes if we've made a mistake or we've done something wrong that impacts something else. From a UI level, like an actual interaction level, we can find out in less than an hour if we've made a mistake. All right, so we're moving from days and weeks down to seconds, hours, and minutes. All right, so a lot of motivation for those fast feedback loops. The other thing is we want to avoid that heavy regression cycle at the end of testing. All right, so traditional mindset, we develop, we test, we want to have that final confidence before we deploy to production maybe, so we do these regression cycles. Sometimes in some places that could be days or weeks. All right, it's going to take a long time. And anyone that's done this as a tester, you're going to know that this is going to be the worst part of your job potentially, is because you're doing these mind-numbing scripts, working through things that you just don't really want to be doing, and you know it works, so you kind of don't pay much attention. Another advantage I have listed there is the scalability. All right, if I want to test my product on multiple websites, multiple devices, and all these different things to interact with, if I'm doing that manually, I have to do that myself each time. Okay, I'll test on my iPhone, test on my Android, do all this different type of testing. If I've automated once, and I can just switch that automation to now point new driver, new device, and I can get that instant scaling up on tests across the whole abundance of drivers or devices that I want to look at. And then probably a really important reason to think about as well that underpins all of this is that employee satisfaction. All right, people on the team get to improve their skill set. They get to stay current. A lot of companies have moved to test automation. That is the way we want to move forward. Work can actually be quite a bit of fun as well, because now we've skilled ourselves up. We're kind of getting a bit more technical. The workday has changed, all right? Instead of doing the boring manual regressions, you're now doing the fun exploratory testing, which we like to call the real testing of software. And I put there right at the end, staff retention as well. Now that's a real big one that we don't often think about, right? I currently have 3 people that have come to AFLAC who specifically left for the reason of coming to do automation that they weren't doing at their previous place. Of the applicants we've had, I'd say more than half of them had listed that as their primary reason for wanting to leave their current employer. And I have a list of people that are looking to come in still, again, same reason, they want to get their hands on test automation, because that's the way the world is moving. They need that upskill. All right, so I thought a way, as fun as the topic as this is, I thought we'll try and make it even more fun, take it to the next level, all right? So we'll look at it as kind of like a board game. So you'll see we have 2 end goals that we want to get to. The first one is we want to minimize that manual regression set that we're talking about, okay? That's going to be along the pathway to getting to fully automated deployments. All right, so that's when we're talking about CI/CD and our deployment pipelines. That's going to be the absolute pinnacle, but it doesn't have to be the main reason why you're doing test automation. If you're just looking for that target, you're still going to get a lot of value from that, but you're going to have the same pitfalls along the way. All right, so what we'll do is this will be like a game of snakes and ladders where it meets Jumanji. All right, so we'll only find out where the ladders and snakes are as we get there. All right. I may have oversold how much fun it's going to be, but we'll see how we get on. All right, so first roll, we got a 4, and I had to borrow a piece from my Monopoly set. I didn't have everything together, so we got the hat. So we move our 4 places across the board, and almost as if this was predetermined, we've landed on the ladder, which is getting the right training. Okay, so that's going to be the first fundamental thing that's going to help accelerate this journey of ours. So what can often happen is we jump in too quickly, and we haven't fully evaluated why we want to do this, how we're going to do it, and what the actual outcome is going to be. All right, so once we've done that, we've got the right training, we can agree on the strategy and tools. And another benefit we have is that we miss the snake, which is not committing the time to research, okay? Because if we don't do that, and we make a mistake, we have to start again. And we can keep on starting that again if we're not really committing that time and getting that full appreciation of what it is that we want to learn. Now, there's a couple of ways we can look at doing this, all right? Some recommendations I have. So one of them is treat this like you would treat any other software project. Okay, if you do a software project, you're going to have requirements that you build up. You're going to know what your desirable end goal is. You're then going to have a team work on it together, get those different levels of input, work on it together, and then you're all going to benefit from what comes out at the end. So it's better that everyone has an input to that. Don't be tempted by the quick wins. All right, so what's going to happen is a lot of people think of test automation and they think, I need a tool to automate my UI. So they go on Google, test automation tools, come up with a list of results. Of course, those are all going to be sales websites and everything else, so it comes up. It's going to say, download this example, use this free trial. You're going to click through, and it's going to work in a matter of seconds. And you'll be like, oh, this is amazing. I've got it working. And then you'll say, well, let me try this against my own website. Change a couple parameters, click, click, click. Now it's going to work on yours. And you can easily say, that's amazing. I've got it working. Right, job done. Let's implement this tool. Right, but there's a lot more that comes into this. There's a strategy that you really need to plan out in advance. Tooling is a set of what we want to achieve in this, but the strategy is going to be where the real win is going to come in with test automation. And that's the part where we really have to think more about. There's also the risk where, because you're working in a team, there's going to be people with different backgrounds and experiences. What you'll almost certainly hear is someone saying, we used to use this tool in my last place, and it worked, so let's just use that, all right? Now that again is falling into a couple pitfalls there. Number one, that tool is not associated with the strategy. Okay, so again, we've missed the real requirement for the strategy. Another problem is that we don't know what the previous business was, what they were actually designing, how it was developed, what the overall tool set was, the custom base, everything else could be different from yours, in which case the tool doesn't suit what you need. So just because you have one person that knows how to do something and can accelerate your path to getting to that tool usage correctly, that's not going to aid your overall journey. So that's one to be careful of. Now, I have some recommendations for, I don't want to call it homework, but some additional reading you might want to do. It's video, so you can just sit back and let the education flow into you. All right, so one I really recommend, first of all, is this website, Test Automation University, okay? Not a real university, they're not accredited, you don't get a degree, there's no cost, you don't even have to register on their site. It's nice if you do, because it keeps track of your progress on the courses you go to. But they've got an absolute wealth of really good videos, training instruction videos, tool demos, and everything else. And these are industry experts. These are really good people. Angie Jones is one of the top automation people in the market at the moment, and we'll look at some others now. This is a 47-minute video where she'll walk you through step by step what you want to think about when you're talking about your strategy. We're going to look at tooling will be one of those things. We're going to think about how the team's going to work together. We're going to look at the strategy, the heuristics we can use to help advance those strategies, and design patterns, coding practices, page object model, and all of those things. And we're also going to talk about what to automate first. One of the challenges that you're going to have if you do adopt this is what's the most important thing for us to get started with. Okay, so Angie will talk you through all the things that you're going to want to think about when it comes to that. So she's going to help us get to that first point that I said, which was the minimizing the regression set, all right? The next video to watch is by Lisa Crispin. She's an industry leader in agile testing, all right? So she quite literally has written several books on the subject. So if there's someone that knows what she's talking about, it's going to be Lisa Crispin. She has this great video talking about testing and testing in DevOps. And that will help us get to that final end goal that I had in the very top left corner of having those automated deployments. All right, so those two videos are going to work well together. Now, I just want to add a little caveat to this as well, is in both of these talks, they'll talk about the test automation pyramid. Right, now you may have heard of that already, you may not. It's fine, it's one of the main heuristics we're going to use to help us design our strategy, where we talk about a stable base of unit tests at the bottom, then service layer testing, and then UI testing, and then manual testing at the top. And I'm not going to bring that up, but what I will say is there's a new modern approach to that heuristic, right? Because people very easily understand the test automation pyramid, but then don't apply it in a way that necessarily fits their product. So I want you to watch those videos and then watch this one by Richard Bradshaw, where it says pyramids are ancient. And he talks about how we can best use the test pyramid in a different way, but that's going to make more sense to the way software is written and tested these days, right? So if we're going to watch those ones, make sure that you watch the one by Richard Bradshaw with it, just to make sure we get that full rounded picture of how to use the pyramids. Now they say that from giving a talk like this, there'll be about 5% retention of the things that come up. So if there are going to be 3 slides that, if anything else, I hope you walk away with today, right? These 2 are going to be the first 2 of the slides. Okay, if you remember nothing else from today, remember these slides and the one I'll point out later on, okay? Because these are going to be crucial in getting that initial path set up towards that test automation goal. Right. So we've avoided the snake, we're getting going, and now we're going to start creating our automated tests. All right, so good, we rolled an 11. So go a bit faster, 3, 6, 9, carry the 1, and 11. All right, so now we started doing our automation, and someone on the team has said, this is going a bit slow. We've changed the way we're working. We're now adding an extra bit of technology to this whole stack. We're learning it. It's kind of slowed down the number of features that are making their way across the board. So someone says, well, I've got an idea. Let's just raise the automation as a separate ticket so we can move that into the following sprint. All right. Now that's the problem right there immediately, is that we've viewed the automated testing as a separate activity to the actual work itself. Right, and it's taken a long time for us to get to this point where we've accepted that we don't have planning, testing, development, and everything else. But now what we've worked on is having the understanding within the teams that the overall goal for everything, something isn't finished until it's developed and tested properly, right? But now we introduce something new, we automatically put it on the outer again. So we need to get the right mindset that part of our deliverable is going to be that automated testing. So now we're not only delivering a feature that has been tested and works correctly, but it can also test itself and tell you if it's correct or not. Okay, so that's the important thing. Now that's a big mindset shift that we have to take within the organization, because that is going to change the way the team is working in general. And that's going to require management buy-in. Right? And I'll talk a little bit later about how we can get that management buy-in. So shifting up on the board, let's see, we've rolled an 8. So we move across, and no, we've just missed the ladder for the whole team approach. Okay, so now that we've decided we're just going to work in our silos and work individually, so now we've actually missed this opportunity, and you can see there's a lot of open territory here, a lot of snakes or ladders we can hit along the way. So one of the things that's really going to help is the team working together. All right, so hopefully your team's already working in a state where we don't have these imaginary silos of work and this definition of a developer is responsible for this and a tester is responsible for this, right? We're all part of a team that's trying to achieve that goal of successful product delivery that works correctly, all right? So what we need to do is blur that hard line between responsibilities. Now, one of the ways we do that is by planning up front. So when we're planning the work that's going into a feature, let's also talk about the testing, all right? How are we going to test this when it gets to that stage? What testing can we do up front? All right, so whenever you test an idea, talking about this area, you're still actually testing it because we're already applying that testing lens of what's right and what's wrong, and how do we know if we're right or wrong. So we can start discussing all the features, we can talk about how we're going to test them, and then we start breaking down, and we say, wait a second, that actually sounds like, imagine I'm testing a user login, for example. Okay, so I'm going to have a UI, and that's going to test password strength. I'm going to have an API that's also going to test password strength. All right, so now it's very easy for me to write a test from that UI level as a workflow that's going to then check the whole system, make sure that everything works. But the actual work's only really happening in that JavaScript on the UI level. So let me write unit tests there that are going to take milliseconds to run, rather than running tests that are going to take a couple minutes to load up the web page. The whole system's got to be deployed and working, everything's up and running, and then I'll only know if it's working, all right? So let me test it in individual units like that. And we can discuss all of that up front, and we can designate, okay, you're going to be doing the development, write these unit tests. You're doing the API development, you write these unit tests. I'm going to test from the UI, I'll write these tests, all right? So now we know what we're testing before we've even started developing. we can also pay close attention to the unit tests. Right? Traditionally, we always say someone can't test their own work because they're going to look at it with a bit of bias, like my work's correct. Of course, I just kind of do quick checks. But it's perfectly acceptable for developers to write their own unit tests. Right? And we rely heavily on unit tests, but if we don't apply the same level of scrutiny to the quality of those tests, how reliable can they be? All right, so what we want to do is have the QAs reviewing those unit tests. They should be very easy to read, so there's not a technical requirement to understand the language you're working in. It'll be written in a relatively simple English that you can understand what they're doing. And you can say, well, maybe supplement them by adding this in, or maybe that piece isn't necessary, and you can improve them that way, working together as a team. And there's also a technique called mutation testing, which is software that will run against your unit test and just verify that they work in the way that you think they are. So you get that verification that your tests are actually doing what you think they should be doing. And then again, like I mentioned earlier, that automation can be done by anyone. Okay, so our goal isn't to change what testing a tester is doing. A tester is still going to have to, or a QA is going to have to do that work and verify that the features are correct. We're trying to eliminate that regression, or that recheck-in and recheck-in, right? So there's nothing that says the developer can't create those automated tests themselves from the UI level, okay? Because that's not the test itself. That's just a check that the system is working today the same way it was working yesterday. It's not actual testing. All right, so you can see that there's a couple extra snakes that we're going to hit along the way now. We've kind of missed this opportunity to try bypass all of these. So now there's two common sayings you're going to hear. One will be, let's just leave it till the end. And the other one is that features take precedence. So let's look at both of those together. So leave it to the end. We hear it quite often. Normally it's going to be, again, because we're trying to adapt to this new piece of work that we're doing, we're going to slow down a little bit. So we used to be delivering 100% of feature effort in a sprint, but now we're delivering maybe 60, 70, 80% of feature effort in a sprint. So it means our deadlines are going to change a bit. So we're going to start panicking a bit. We're going to say, all right, let's leave the automation. We'll come back to that at the end. All right, so a couple of reasons why that doesn't work, and there's an implication, okay? So first things, I think that should be in the first point I make, is that if you don't have time now, there's not going to be this magical allotment of time waiting at the end that you can utilize, okay? The whole point of doing this is that we're using the time up front and we're saving that time at the end. Okay, so it's all about understanding that balance that where we're using the time more constructively. And we're also missing out on that very first reason I had for why we want to do test automation, which is getting that fast feedback. Right? If we don't have an active automation test set running now, we're not going to get that feedback telling us, listen, your tests aren't right, or the work you've done isn't correct. Okay, so we're going to miss out on that, which is one of the key reasons why we're going to want to do the automation in the first place. And you'll see the snake is taking us back down to here. And that's not just because that's the size of the snake I chose to use for this one. It's because there's we're not just pushing the pause button on the automation where we can just come back in 2-3 months' time and push play again, and we're going to carry on. We're going to have to rework this code because our product's going to have evolved so much that we're going to have to do all of that speeding and catch up with that. And I've seen several projects that have done exactly this, and by the time they've got back to the work, we've had to make the decision of, do we just scrap what's there entirely, or do we just try kind of weasel this back around to kind of catch up? And of course, if you're doing that, you're introducing risk because now we can't fully verify. It just takes more effort. So you're not pushing pause, you are actually pushing stop if we leave that kind of, let's leave it till the end. And then the features take precedence. This one, a big snake over there, is loving it because he knows that this is a difficult one to recover from, right? The problem with this is that it shows this kind of understanding that we've completely failed almost to get the value of this all across, all right? I've heard before someone saying, I fully understand the value in this and the time saving that we'll have, but we just don't have the time to do it. You say, well, that's completely paradoxical because if you did understand the benefit of doing this, you'd understand what the benefit is at the end and how it actually does make sense to do it. So this comes down to that leadership buy-in up front. Okay, that's what we really need to make sure we stabilize, and I'll talk a bit about that later on, as I said. All right, so we've struggled our way through. And we've just got a little bit, we've got one more snake to get past before it looks like we're almost home and free here. So see, this one is where we struggle to see the return on investment. Now that's more than likely going to come from someone fairly high up. Depends on how it could happen. But you'll see that I've taken, there's the snake, he's going off the board, because if you don't get past that snake correctly, that's you out of the game, all right? So there's this graph. I don't know if anyone's seen this before, but I'll talk through it anyway. So here we're talking about time, of course, going across there, and then the cumulative cost that we can look at for the two different types of testing we're going to have, all right? So if we look at the manual testing line first, you'll see it's just that steady, consistent line that keeps going up. Okay, so when we start off, we're looking to say, oh, well, it only took me 2 or 3 days to do that regression. It would have taken a month if I was trying to automate this. So so that was a quick win. So let's do that. The problem is that every time you do that, you have to commit that time. Of course, the product's growing, your regression pack is growing, so that time's actually, it's not just consistently going up, it's also growing as it goes up. Okay, so that's going there. What this graph doesn't show you is the risk of human error as well. All right, anyone that's done any kind of real long-term regression testing knows what it's like. You get into work, take the brain out, put it on the desk, click tap, click tap, click tap, 5 o'clock, brain back in, and then you go home, all right? So we want to avoid that. Human error can slip in so easily with that. Now, test automation, we have this real kind of tricky part up front. Now, everything we've looked at today, up until now, is happening at this part of the curve. All of those snakes are waiting for us in here, right? It's going to slow things down for a certain part. We're learning the new technology. We're trying to get up to speed. We're going to struggle, and we're not going to see that value. You know, it's going to take us 2 weeks, and we've automated one test. It's like, oh, big deal, we've automated one scenario, all right? But after a while, if we stay committed and we get there, we're going to hit this crossover point. And now that's when we have our reliable automation suite in place. Now we're getting all the benefits of fast feedback. We've reduced the manual regression run. Now I'm adding all tests for my other devices and browser types and everything else. That's all been added in here, and there's almost no commitment. Now I'm just maintaining that test suite, or I'm just adding tests slowly as I go along. So you can see there's this cumulative cost. So if you want to get management buy-in, double underline, that's what you want to show. It's going to be this heavy part at the front. We're going to struggle. We're going to slow down. Let's commit time to this project. Let's make sure we know what we're going to get into. But when we get here, you're going to see that benefit. People aren't going to be leaving to go somewhere else that is doing this. They're going to stay here because they've got that input. They've got that value from doing it. So pretty much, this is just summarizing everything I spoke about. Okay, so I said there's 3 slides to remember. 3 slides, 3 fingers. So the first 2 was how we're going to make sure we establish the right plan up front. And the other one is this, how are we going to justify this? How are we going to get that buy-in? And when we hit these snakes along the way, when we get to these tricky points that are going to potentially block us, how are we going to overcome them? All right? It's because we know that when we get to this point, we're going to be saved, and we're going to not have the issues with that anymore. All right. So I realized I spoke very quickly. I tried to slow myself down, but I always forget to. Are there any questions? I do have a quick demo on a tool I want to recommend as well, which will be 2 or 3 minutes, but I thought I just wanted to make sure I'll open up for any questions if there are any first, and then we can have a look at that. Cheers.
Hello. How does test-driven development replace or complement test automation?
So that's a good question. So that actually does tie directly in with all of this. All right. So when I was talking earlier on about as a whole team approach, we would plan up front what we're going to do. Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, test-driven development is the concept where you, as a developer, you write your unit tests. You haven't written your code yet, but you write your unit tests, and they're all going to fail. Then you start writing the code that then those tests start passing, and that's how you verify. So you start with the test. Start where you want to finish, write those, and then write the code that gets those working. So what we can do then as a whole team in our test-driven development approach is the testers can help design what those tests would be, so that those unit tests that we're creating as part of that TDD approach is making sure that we're thinking about everything rather than just what one person as a developer is thinking of as they do that. we're applying that testing lens to create those as well.
So then it's complementing that test automation, it's not
Implementing, I think that's a great way, because that does ultimately tie in with the automation as well. So that's part of that overall strategy that we want to look at. So the test pyramid that I alluded to earlier, so that's talking about creating the unit tests as your primary line of defense. Then when you have the confidence that the unit tests are working, which are testing directly against the code, you then make sure that a deployed service is working, or if it's just stood up in isolation, that's working. And then you kind of go up to the UI test. So it's all about that level of confidence as we move up through the layers. So that test-driven development, those unit tests, that's a great way to start off the strategies to get those in first.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Anything else? Cool, all right. So I've got the links in here, which obviously doesn't help because you can't click on there from where you're sitting. But I just put my LinkedIn thing. If you do want to get the slideshow, just connect with me and then I'll email it over to you. You can go there. So it's just the links to the Apply tool, the Test Automation University. That's just a repo that I have, which has some robot code in, which I'll show you in a minute. So if you do want to see one of the tools that I would recommend. So one of the tools I recommend is Robot Framework. Okay, so a way to think of this is it's kind of like a car, but without an engine. Okay, so this will be the doors, the windows, the radio, the steering wheel. It's all there. That's what you interact with. That's what you see. That's what you interact with. But the engine underneath is just going to be an additional library that we import. All right, so if we have a look here, I'll always be interacting with the Robot Framework layer, which is essentially plain English. And I'll show you some code now, and you can see how simple it looks. But then we can use a Selenium library underneath that. So the power is actually Selenium's doing all the work, but we're just interacting through simple English commands. We can do then interact with Appium, which would be on your mobile devices. Playwright is the new kid on the block, also doing web testing, but it's faster. It has the potential to outlast Selenium, which is the default industry standard. From here, we can also start doing API tests. We can do HTTP requests and everything else, again, through that same interface, which also means we can write tests where line number 1 is do a post to an API to ready my test data. Line number 2 will be Selenium, which will be log into the web page and see what the browser now looks like that we've loaded their test data in. So all of that's driven from the one car, interacting with all these different engines underneath. We can test databases. We can interact with AutoIT or AutoIT. That's going to interact with the Windows desktop. And also there's a whole bunch more. Anything that you can do in Python, you can do with Robot Framework. And you can do everything in Python, so you can pretty much do everything with robots. But it gives you that clean interface. All right, so I'll start this video here. So this code here, all I've done at this point is installed Python and installed the libraries. There's no code behind this that I've written. This is all the code that's going to interact. And you see there's 39 lines. All right, so I'll zoom in a bit more. All right, so I'm going to import the Selenium library. And then this is a command, open browser. I've just got a variable there. So this is just the Selenium library commands. I've just created as a variable the browser type. Chrome, I can change it to Firefox, whatever I want to quite easily. Those are just locators to find elements on the web page whenever that's opened up. I'm using test-driven development model for this. So each one of these lines is going to be a test case that's going to go down and run these steps. Okay, so these are actually 8 tests that are going to just share this code. So you can see the commands there, straightforward. I'm going to input text into that element that I declared higher up and pass in the argument. Input the password. I'm going to then click the login button, wait till the error message is visible, and then I'm going to take a screenshot, and then I'll reload the page so that the next test has a fresh page to start from. Okay, so 39 lines. It took me 5 minutes, or probably 10 minutes to type it up. Backspace, 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 type that up. So we trigger the test, run it across, and there's it running. Okay, so straight away. But now don't fall into the quick win that I warned you about. This is part of an overall test strategy. But this is a good tool. So that was using Selenium to run those tests. It generates a report straight away. Green for pass, obviously. There's all the test cases that we executed. I forgot to zoom in on this part, but you can see down we have it breaks down, and then we can click into the steps. So that's input text, enter empty field into this name, We captured a screenshot, so it automatically embeds that into the report for us. There's our test evidence. So all of that comes with Robot straight out the box. We don't have to maintain the framework. All right, so now I decided we're going to be a bit smarter. We're going to create a page object model. So now we've moved those page element locators away from where the test code is. It's into a shareable resource, okay? So we declare the IDs. Now you can see I've got the commands again, but I've put them into these nicely named keywords. So now I've built these Lego blocks that I can use to interact with that page. So now if I go back to my test, I'm not opening the browser. I'm going to navigate to Swag Labs. I'm still going to open the browser, but I'm using these clearly defined keywords. I'm going to populate username, populate password, click the login button, catch a page and get there. Okay, so that would run, that's exactly the same work, but it's just going to now be that page object as a resource that's available for anything else to use. Okay, so I just wanted to show you that quickly. Just if you are going to look down at tools, this wouldn't be one of the more common ones that come up. What will always come up, people will show you Selenium and Cucumber, but if you use a tool like that, you're going to have to now learn Java, or you're going to have to learn .NET to interact with it, and it's going to get a bit technical. You can see there how straightforward that syntax was, and it has all the power of Python underneath it, but you don't need to learn Python to do it. That's important takeaway from that. Okay, so that's what we use at Aflac. We use it with Playwright, Appium, and Selenium, depending on the project that we're in. We have people that ramped up on that. Someone that started with us last year, but under a year ago, she came in, she was very nervous, don't have any automation experience, it's not in my wheelhouse, I'm quite anxious about this. I said, don't worry, got you covered. Within 4 months, she had gone from not knowing any type of test automation. She came into a new company, new people, new domain, new product, everything else, learning an entirely new skill set. Within 4 months, she was teaching other people how to do this. All right. So that's because it's that easy to pick up. So I do recommend, if you are looking at tools, look at robots, do the tutorials. That link that I have on GitHub has a nice kind of set of tests that kind of explains things, talks you through the install, which is very straightforward as well. All right. I will be available at the, well, actually it's lunchtime. I'll be available at the food hall for a bit, then I'll be back at the Aflac store for a while. So if you do want to kind of have any follow-up questions or anything, feel free to come past and I'll be there. All right. Thank you very much.